Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Kalen DeBoer, this Alabama program kicking off spring practice early yesterday afternoon. Want to talk about some storylines, some position battles that I'm going to be following for this Alabama program heading into spring practice and then heading into the 2024 season. I think what's most exciting about the next couple of weeks and months is this is by far the most talented roster Kalen DeBoer has been able to work with during his college coaching career. And there are a lot of college football fans, a lot of national media hosts that like to write this Alabama team off. And you dive into this roster, you dive into this depth chart, and this is still one of the most talented teams that you see across the country. And Kalen DeBoer is known for his ability to maximize talent on his rosters. This is a team that's going to be really exciting to cover and talk about over the next couple of weeks. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, just want to say thank you to you guys. It has been a blast talking this team since Kalen DeBoer has taken over, talking transfer portal additions, talking what Kalen DeBoer has done on the high school trail. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. And I want to start with one of the bigger, probably the biggest storyline for me, that is, in terms of this Alabama team heading into 2024, that is the marriage between Jalen Milroe and this Kalen DeBoer offense. And I think there are reasons to have some questions about how Jalen Milroe fits into what Kalen DeBoer wants to do. But at the end of the day, the more I think about this, it goes back to my ideas of Kalen DeBoer as a head football coach, and that is a guy that knows how to use the players on his roster. He knows how to maximize the talent. And Jalen Milroe is a guy that has such a unique set of skills. I don't really question Kalen DeBoer's ability to let Jalen Milroe use those skill sets and be a really good college quarterback at the college level. I'm really excited to see how they use Jalen Milroe, how he looks in this offense. And then you look at the wide receiver position. And I think that, yes, there are some questions. You lose a guy like Isaiah Bond. You lose a guy like Amari Neblack. I look at this wide receiver room, and I am extremely excited about how it shakes out heading into 2024. We know what Kalen DeBoer does with wide receivers. If you were to ask me right now, who leads Alabama in receiving yards at the end of this 2024 year, I'm going to go to a guy that's not even on this roster yet, and that's Ryan Williams. Now, yes, there are some questions, right? Ryan Williams physically probably needs to go through some development, but I'll say this, right? He's a reclass guy from that 2025 class. The speed, the twitch that Ryan Williams has, he is one of the smoothest movers I've seen come out of the high school ranks. That ability is going to translate quickly to the college football level. A lot of maybe college football fans who don't necessarily follow the recruiting trail will have some questions about this wide receiver room. I mean, they have Ryan Williams, who I think immediately inserts himself as being one of the more dynamic wide receivers in the country in that 2024 year. And I get he's a reclass guy. He's not coming in until the summer. I still have a ton of confidence about Ryan Williams. The next guy I want to talk about is Jalen Hale. And we talk about what does Jalen Milroe do so well, and that is push the ball a ton and kind of attacking that deeper third of the defense. You got a guy in Jalen Hale who I think is just a prototypical expert at working down the field and attacking that deeper third. Really excited to see the dynamic between Jalen Milroe and Jalen Hale, kind of a similar relationship that you saw with Jermaine Burton in terms of attacking downfield, hitting some of those explosive plays. And you have a couple other guys that you're really excited about, right? Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice, two guys that are really good with the football in their hands. And I'll shout out a couple more. Emmanuel Henderson Jr., certainly a name that could emerge. And then Jeremy Bernard, transferring from Washington, a guy that doesn't necessarily show on the stat sheet that he's a dude yet. I think that's important to keep in mind. He was behind three of the best wide receivers in the country at Washington. You read the Washington spring notes from that 2023 season. Jeremy Bernard was a guy that a lot of people were really excited about heading into 2024. And I think there's a reason Kalen DeBoer brings him over to Alabama. I think Jeremy Bernard factors in as well. And you look at this wide receiver room, and at the end of the day, it's a very good problem to have if you're Kalen DeBoer. There are, 7, 8 wide receivers that you're extremely excited about. I think that there's going to be some wide receivers that step up and really take over that wide receiver room. And I'd point that room too, right? You have CJ Dupree coming back, who phenomenal run blocker, a guy that gives you that high floor in that tight end room. And then you have true freshman Caleb Odom, who's coming in and I think can be, for lack of better terms, a matchup nightmare as kind of that jumbo slot. Amari Niblack gave Alabama a lot of value. Quite frankly, I just think Caleb Odom is a little bit more smooth and has a little bit more juice in terms of the athleticism that he brings. He's another guy that you talk about true freshman playing early for Alabama. Caleb Odom is one of my favorite tight ends coming out of the high school ranks in that 2024 class. Now, the running back spot, I think many of the Alabama fans who've been rocking with the fellas, yes, it's quote unquote a position battle. I am putting a lot of money on Justice Haynes kind of emerging as that running back one. I think Justice Haynes has the capability of being one of the better running backs that we've seen in Alabama the last 2 decades. And I get that is high praise. I am extremely high on Justice Haynes. Loved him coming out of Buford. Really excited about that running back room. I think the last question you want to talk about on the offensive side of the football is the offensive line, and not really on the inside, right? Tyler Booker, Jaden Roberts, I think 2 of the better guard duos that you'll see in the country. You bring in Parker Brailsford from Washington, was phenomenal for Washington last year. The inside of that offensive line is going to be absolutely nails. I think the question is, how does this tackle situation play out? You lose a guy in J.C. Latham, who is one of the best tackles in the country. You lose a guy like Caden Proctor to the portal. What is this tackle position going to look like? You feel pretty good about Elijah Pritchett at that left tackle spot. And I think Miles McVay has been a guy that I've heard a lot of Alabama fans mention in high regard. Nick Saban has done a phenomenal job recruiting that offensive line. There are a ton of guys that have the ability to come in and play at a high level. I'm looking at that right tackle spot, but at the end of the day, Alabama, in my mind, is in a lot better shape at that tackle position than a lot of other teams across the country. Moving to the defensive side of the football, and I think the biggest question mark, very similar to the conversation we had about this offensive line, is I feel really good about what Alabama has on the inside of this defensive line, right? Guys like Tim Keenan, Tim Smith, Jaheim Otis, Damon Payne Jr., that is a very, very good inside of that defensive line. I think the question that you have for this Alabama defense is, where's the pass rush coming from, right? You lose guys like Braswell and Dallas Turner, who were some of the better edge rushers that we saw across the country. Who emerges? And I'll shout out a few guys that I'm most excited for. You look at a guy like Keon Keeley, who I thought was a guy that had the potential to come in and play relatively early. Obviously, being behind guys like Braswell, like Dallas Turner, it was hard to find reps. I think Keon Keeley, with another year development, is probably going to emerge as a guy in this defense. And another guy in Yanza Pierre. The 2 guys that, coming out of high school, I think Keon Keeley was a little bit more of a refined finished product. Yanza Pierre definitely was a guy that needed a year of development. If you're looking for kind of that high-end edge rushers that Alabama has enjoyed the last 5 years, those are probably the 2 guys that I'm looking for. At the linebacker spot, you ain't got any. The question you have with this linebacker spot is not the starting linebackers, right? Deontay Lawson and Jahad Campbell, I think, might make up the best linebacker duo that you see in college football, maybe next to Georgia with Munden and Allen. But outside of that, that's probably where you're looking at in terms of the young linebackers providing depth to that room. But Jahad Campbell, Deontay Lawson, certainly have no questions about that position. Now, moving to the back end again, where you replace your 2 boundary safeties and guys like Kool-Aid McKinstry, Terry and Arnold, obviously Caleb Downs hits the transfer portal. I'm looking at, and again, this might be a little bit of the recruiting nerd in me, I absolutely loved this defensive back class for Alabama in that 2024 class, right? Xavier Brown, about as polished of a cornerback as you saw coming out in 2024. Jalen Mbakwe, probably more of the highest upside that you have at that cornerback spot coming out in 2024. My eyes are both on those guys in terms of pushing for starting reps at that boundary cornerback spot. Damani Jackson is, in my mind, a really interesting guy to talk about. You saw some significant growing pains the first 2 years at USC. 2 things to keep in mind. One, Damani Jackson, from a physical trait standpoint, checks about every single box that you want to see checked, right? He has the length, he has the long speed, he has the frame that you want. Can he put it together? Can he get developed in being an all-conference caliber cornerback? And if you get that, that mitigates a lot of the concerns that you have about that cornerback spot. Then you look to the safeties, that nickel role. I mean, getting Keon Sabb from Michigan, many of you guys know I'm a massive Michigan fan. I'll say this, y'all got a really good one in Keon Sabb. I think he comes in right away and starts at one of those safety spots. I think that allows you to play Malachi Moore, excuse me, at that star position, where I think that's by far his best position heading into 2024. Getting Malachi Moore back, in my mind, absolutely massive. You have guys like Xavier Mincy, who, again, really high on him coming out of that 2024 class. I think the question mark in that secondary room is just, what do the young guys look like who are early enrolled in spring practice? And can they be guys that you're going to, or that you can rely on during that 2024 season? And if some of those guys emerge, I mean, that kind of settles a lot of your, I guess, nerves, if you'd say, in terms of replacing Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terrion Arnold. You look at this depth chart, and on paper, it's easy to ask questions about this Alabama team, right? Obviously, starting with losing your head coach, Nick Saban, losing your top 2 edge rushers, losing your 2 starting tackles. There are questions, excuse me, to be had, but that doesn't mean you forget about the roster construction that Nick Saban has done the last couple of years. This is still a team that is one of the most talented teams in college football. You just have some questions about the starting spots. I think that's why spring practice is so exciting for Alabama. You got a lot of position battles. You got a lot of guys that have been in this program for a couple of years. You also have a lot of guys who are young coming up the pipeline that can certainly play early for this Alabama program. Going to be one of the more fun teams to talk about as spring practice rolls on. We'll continue to update you guys as some of the storylines start to play out. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.